G'day Crossroads. Today I have Michael Kellahan with me from Freedom for Faith, and I'm going to be asking him a bunch of questions about some pretty important issues to do with religious freedom, to do with the gospel, to do with how we're meant to be as Christians engaging in this age that we find ourselves in. So Michael, welcome. What is Freedom for Faith?
Thanks, mate. Freedom for Faith is a Christian think tank that exists to see religious freedom protected in Australia.
Now, why does something like Freedom for Faith even have to exist in Australia?
It'd be nice if it didn't. In many ways, we've had remarkable freedoms. By any global historical measure, we've had great freedoms, but there's just a range of things at the moment that are happening that say, actually, it's up for grabs whether people agree that it's a good thing or not, and so we want to have some good thinking in that conversation.
Well, Michael, many Christians are going to ask, and it's a fair question, what does the Bible actually have to say about religious freedom?
Yeah, and the short answer is it really doesn't say anything at all. In the same way that it doesn't say anything about the Trinity. That is, the word isn't there, the phrase isn't there, but you get the building blocks of a new way of thinking. So you can look to lots of different places, right back to Jesus before Pilate, the question there about who has authority. And very early, as the gospel goes out throughout the ancient world, you see a new way of thinking develop about how the individual has a loyalty to Caesar, but also to God. And therefore, you need to have freedom from a belief which might be different from the state. And the Christians thought that not just for themselves, but for others holding different beliefs as well, which is really interesting.
Many people will say and assume that we actually already have religious freedom in Australia. So again, why does a group like Freedom for Faith have to exist?
Yeah. And we call that kind of the doctrine of she'll be right, or no worries, that great organising principle of Australian culture, that all is well. And it's fair to say that has served us well. Over the last century, we've had remarkable freedoms by any global historical measure. But there are genuine, real things that we need to look at now to say, actually, that valuing of difference and tolerance now is more up for grabs. And so we are needing to think harder and in fresh new ways about how it is that we live together well with deep differences.
Well, some may still be suspicious that something like Freedom for Faith, again, really could be a front for some sort of bigotry. So that really what you're doing is you're trying to protect certain rights over and above other rights, and therefore it's seen as a protectionism for Christianity or something, and that other people are going to be the victims of this. How would you counter that argument or engage with that line of thinking?
Well, look, I think it's important in some ways to concede something, to say that, in fact, some Christian thinking in this space has arisen just as LGBT rights particularly have come to the fore. And there has been this kind of relationship between the rights that people have needed to figure out. So it's not as though we come to this virtuously and neutrally, but in fact it has come out of a conflict that's taken place in the culture. And yet it would be a mistake to say that that's actually all that's going on. I see a lot of the time religious freedom has nothing to do, in fact, with that conflict of rights. It can be things as simple as reasonable accommodation within a workplace for someone who has religious dietary requirements or won't work on a certain day. So the places that religious freedom touches is far bigger than what you'll see sometimes splashed across the front of a media debate.
Yeah. Well, over the last few years, a lot has sort of happened in this space. There's been a major debate on marriage and decisions made. There's been this formal Ruddock review that has occurred as well. Where are things up to in that space from what you can see?
Yeah, look, you could certainly drill down and give quite a history, blow by blow, that would fill volumes in terms of the process. Generally, though, you can say that religious freedom has been kicked down the road, and so there's been, I think, really a failure of leadership on all sides to really grapple with this seriously and say that people's religious identity is a serious thing that needs to be treated with respect, and the ability for us to live well with those different beliefs is, something that isn't yet adequately protected by law.
Another question for you. If we have religious freedom fully embraced in our country, some people might fear that won't it mean that Sharia law will suddenly come into play in this country?
Yeah. Look, I think religious freedom is never, ever understood as an absolute thing. So, we're not going to see people sacrificing virgins into volcanoes because they worship Aztec, religions and that kind of thing. So there are always limits to freedom. And the understanding of where that limit should be drawn is important. But there's no one in the country at the moment, politician or anyone making submissions in this area, who's saying, let's introduce Sharia law.
Yeah.
Now, there are suggestions that you've got a default thing operating away from the law, that it's kind of happening in a shadow kind of shadow lands of how people are actually doing things. That's an issue at present.
Yep.
It's not a question of religious freedom suddenly opening the door to something which is new. So no, I think there's no reasonable fears that should be preyed upon around Sharia law.
I understand Freedom for Faith made a significant submission to the Ruddock Review. What was going on for you in that? What was and what's sort of been the outcome of that that you've noticed?
Yeah, look, we certainly did a large amount of work. Professor Patrick Parkinson was the lead author on that, around to 108 pages, so I won't try and give you a summary here. But we did see it as a significant opportunity to be at the table and to be able to say, look, here are the things that we think are important, here are some ways forward, here's a better way to be able to do things. And although there have been delays in seeing that report released and let alone seeing its findings implemented, it has certainly given us the opportunity to have great conversations with both sides of politics, with other interested parties around those issues.
Am I wrong? But was there a glue that kind of used to hold Australia together, kind of as a nation? That there were some shared convictions and shared identity that just seems to have fragmented more and more recently, politically, ideologically, socially. What is going on? Is that what you notice as well?
Yeah, look, I think there's always some danger there on looking back to a golden age where everything was well. So it's not like that, but at the same time, you can definitely see signs of a fraying, I guess, of the social compact, and commentators on all sides would agree on that. So if you look back to when we started the Constitution in 1901, you've got just the general agreement of it being a godly commonwealth, and yet the first Act of Parliament comes out and it's about white Australia policy. Yeah. So you've got this weird kind of thing happening where, we're all agreeing we're Christian, and yet some of it is actually tied to being British and what that meant. And those conversations over the last century obviously have changed with immigration, with globalism, but I think most of all probably with secularism. Yeah. That is, for many people today, the gods are dead, and there isn't an agreed kind of a good that we can appeal to say this is how things should be done. And so everything then can be reduced almost to the level of the individual or to politics to say, we just need to work this out for ourselves. And there isn't a bigger story that we kind of tap into. So we look for a story. And the story of secularism is one of finding value in yourself or expressing who you are, particularly sexually since the sexual revolution. Yeah. That kind of movement which has taken place. And in some ways it sees stripping away of the old structures, the old institutions, and the church amongst it as necessary in order to make way for this golden new future.
So is that being driven by individualism, or are there other sort of forces at play? Because it's just so hard to get your hands on kind of what's happening. There's just so much that's going on in this space under this guise now secularism, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, you hit any bookshelf at the moment, and the book shop at the moment, you find bookshelf on bookshelf on bookshelf of people trying in different ways to express what's going on. And there's just a lot of confusion. And in many ways, are we looking at something like the end of the West as we've known it? You know, who knows? It's a bit hard to tell when you're in the middle of some of these things. And I think Christians are asking some of these questions as well. So I think it would be a mistake to think this is Christians fearing secularism and secularism being all triumphant. And you know, instead it's really everyone being, you know, unsure of what it is that holds us together, and unsure whether secularism is going to deliver some of the things. So we've had the sexual revolution, but we also have Me Too. You know, and you think, this thing hasn't delivered what we thought it would. You know, and so in that kind of space, I think there is it's incumbent on Christians to think carefully about whether we actually have a better story about what it means to be human, what it means to be sexual, what it means to be in good relationships, what we're here for, you know.
Well, in the midst of this, who knows where this secular project might go, here we are as a church community, a faith community, holding on to some very core things that are dear to us. How are we meant to engage when all of a sudden we're kind of seen as the bad guys in a way as well? How do we engage? How do we stand against the forces of this age that seem to be perhaps against the very things that we stand for so dearly?
Yeah, well, look, in that move, you've actually got a welcoming back to the situation Christianity has normally been in. That is, a despised, shameful thing that makes no sense, and that's been a challenge right from the start, hasn't it? And how do we respond? Well, without fear, because we know that the times are in God's hands. With hope, because we know that the future is His. With confidence, because Jesus walked out of the grave.
Yeah.
You know, and so it shouldn't be a time of anxiety, even if we're in an age of anxiety. You know, it should be a time when we realise that we may be more out of step with what the world is offering and where the world's thinking. And it may come at a cost. So it may be that there are certain firms that will not employ you, or certain places where living publicly as a Christian will land you in trouble with the HR department. You know? But you know, Jesus isn't promising promotions and glory and earthly treasure and that kind of thing, and calls us to be faithful.
Yeah. Is that what keeps you going in this space? Because you're sort of in the midst of it, aren't you? So.
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah.
Agree that actually there is an opportunity here for us to not be afraid. We want to trust God that He's sovereign. But are there particular ways that we can be stepping forward, or actually stepping into the marketplace informed and wise, but also uncompromising and loving as well?
Yeah. So. Yeah, and there's a twin danger, isn't there? So fear is a danger on one side, then naivety is a danger on the other. Yeah. And you know, there are genuine risks that are here. And so I think at the local church level, you've got to say, actually, what are the risks for us? How is it that we do engage in this space? And it's got to be gracious and prayerful and telling a better story. And probably, I mean, part of it is just investing deeper into these kind of questions, not planning ministries and lives around how things used to work 10 years ago, because the world's moved on. And so we need to think, well, actually, what would university ministry look like if you were barred from entering the university? Or what would it look like if you didn't have access to public spaces? Or if the tax regime changed? Or, you know, and as you think those things, then I think that explains some of the rationale for what we're doing. That is, we're trying to be at the table and engaged in those conversations, rather than complaining about it afterwards, to actually be there before and to say, look, there's some really good reasons to value the diversity that we do have in this country, and to see it and the freedoms that have come with it as a precious thing that mustn't be taken for granted and shouldn't be squandered, and that each generation needs to learn the lessons from the past, to see the real dangers of an overconfident state that suddenly says it's got the key to perfecting human beings and to delivering a social utopia.
Yeah.
Because we've seen how that works, you know, and when states go to enforce those beliefs on its citizens, then it ends up with blood on the streets. I don't say that to be dramatic, it's just that's what happens, you know. And so we, of all people, just need a bit of historical perspective on that, and need to urge everyone for a bit of humility so that we don't try and engineer this perfect society which we know cannot be delivered.
Yeah. Michael, thank you for sharing with us. A website for Freedom for Faith, you can follow here, and encourage you to check that out. Also, there's a link to a great article that Michael has written as well about the fragmentation of our culture and how we have an opportunity to be seeing things move forward. And thank you also for the encouragement that in the end we've got a better story to be offering and a better story to be sharing with people in this marketplace of ideas in this world that we find ourselves in. So thank you.
Thanks.
Keep up the good work. Come back to Crossroads again.
Great.